Today, our program with author Jim Mason is based on his classic expose, An Unnatural Order, The Roots of Our Destruction of Nature. His book explores the cruelty of mechanized animal farming and slaughter and analyzes the West's dominionist worldview, which exalts humans as overlords and owners of other life, an outlook that he believes is rooted in millennia of animal husbandry. Jim will explain how restoring our kinship with animals is central to bridging the rift between humanity and nature. And my name is Michelle Granberg. I'm your moderator. I'm a mentor and team member with Animal Activism Mentorship. I'm located in New Jersey, and I've been a vegan and activist for over 6 years. Our mission at AAM is to empower our fellow humans to take action and equip them with what they need to fight for animal liberation. AAM is here to teach specific tools and lay a strong foundation for activists at all levels on which their activism will stand for years to come. We offer a free 3-month mentorship program that pairs experienced activists with aspiring activists. Through one-on-one mentoring, we generate an increased number of effective activists worldwide because we know this movement needs more activists. Additionally, we offer free workshops that train and educate our mentors, mentees, and the public on various aspects of animal rights activism. We have a podcast called the Animal Liberation Hour, and we host large-scale in-person activism events. AAM is proud to be fueled by FARM, the Farmed Animal Rights Movement, one of the oldest AR organizations in the country. If you're interested in applying to become a mentor or mentee or want to get involved or to donate, please visit our website, animalactivismmentorship.com, and follow both AAM and FARM on social media. So with that being said, it is my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker. Jim Mason is an author and attorney who focuses on human and animal concerns. In addition to An Unnatural Order, he also co-authored The Ethics of What We Eat, Why Our Food Choices Matter, and Animal Factories with well-known ethicist Peter Singer. So we are going to have questions and answers, but please hold your questions until that portion. So welcome, Jim.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. It's so awesome to have you here. We are joined today by many activists and animal advocates. Most are familiar with your work, I imagine. Some are not as familiar, but I'm sure they'll benefit from understanding more about the roots of the animal cruelty that they are fighting. And we know that by understanding the history of animal exploitation, we're better educated and can communicate more effectively, right? Essentially, we're going to connect the dots between the past and the present, which I know you are so good at doing that. So how about, would you start out by telling us a little bit about what made you write this book?
Oh, well, it was a byproduct of finishing the book Animal Factories with Peter Singer. Animal Factories came out in 1980, and once it was released, I kept having a lot of curiosity about animal domestication. Where did the domestic animals come from? Where did cows and pigs and chickens and horses come from? Because there weren't always domestic animals. There were wild animals that were domesticated. So I started reading a lot about the history of domestication. And I found that, of course, new information is coming out all the time, but at the present time, it seems that animals were domesticated in what's now Turkey, about where the earthquake catastrophe is happening now. Eastern Turkey, southern sides of the mountains there in northern Syria, where certain Paleolithic societies, hunter-gatherer societies, were hunting mountain sheep and goats. And over time, because of the crowding of their communities, there was intensified competition for finding food. So it got to where you couldn't hunt and gather anymore because you'd run into your neighbors and there'd be conflict. So little by little, some of those people learned to domesticate the mountain sheep and goats. And before long, they were actually keeping them captive in a barnyard situation. There's evidence that they built pens, corrals, fences to contain their animals. They have evidence that they provided them with fodder, they call it, or hay through the winters. And over time, they became tame or domesticated sheep and goats. And I kept reading as much as I could on this. And then I realized that this had huge repercussions for human culture, which was beginning to develop in that part of the Middle East at that time, because plant agriculture was beginning in Samaria, and sheep and goat domestication was happening here in the northern reaches of Mesopotamia. So they sort of coalesce in a way, and more people are living in settled communities, raising crops and keeping captive animals, sheep, goats, and before long, cattle. So I read everything I could about that, and I realized that this had a huge impact on human views of nature, because before domestication, humans lived in nature more or less naked and exposed to the elements, and a constant daily experience would be the observation of the animals around them, because some of them were hunters and they had to really know the animals in their ecosystem. So when they began to confine them and control them, especially control the breeding and the shape and the look and the colors of the coats and the horns and every aspect of the animals' lives, they were taking control of nature. They were taking control of animals which represented nature to them from the old days, from Paleolithic days. So it caused a tremendous effect on the way they viewed the world. So human beings are now controlling some of the elements of nature, the forces of nature that they used to be inspired by and used to be, I wouldn't say they worshiped, but they included observation of natural forces and the seasons and the coming of spring and winter and the cycles of breeding of the animals. Now humans controlling those forces and those processes gave them, began to give these societies a kind of a sense of being much more powerful, and a sense of themselves as controlling nature, of being in charge of the flow of the river and being in charge of the shape of the horns of the coat of their sheep. So it gave them kind of a new look on the living world around them. And that took me about 12 years to read all those books and come up with a semi-coherent, I hope it's coherent, story about the evolution of what we call dominion culture or human supremacist culture, or the idea that the world belongs to us and God has given it to us, given us license to use it for whatever we want. So as it says in Genesis, I give you dominion over the fish of the sea, the fowl of the air, every beast that crawleth upon, you know the Bible. So it's a command to take over nature and every living thing.
Yeah, so I'm glad you're diving a little bit more deeply into this dominionist view of animals as really part of the roots of so much. Can you say a little bit more about why it's so destructive to have this point?
Well, the next big ideology in our culture that this contributed, the first big ideology is the God-given license to use the world for our own benefit at the expense of everything else. The next big ideology is patriarchy, which is the idea that men are superior to women and have control of women. And in fact, the first form of human slavery, of trafficking and buying and selling enslaved people, was in the ancient Middle East, and it was females, because all of those ancient early history city-states were always at war with each other over cropland and over cattle and water and resources. So they tended to fight with each other a lot. And if you read Genesis and Deuteronomy, especially in Joshua, you'll see how they were constantly at war with each other over land and water, because they had flocks to maintain. And Bible, of course, is mostly about the Hebrew peoples, but they weren't unique. All of their neighbors were doing the same thing. I always like to say that the Hebrews were just a lot better at writing the story than the others, than their neighbors. But everybody was doing the same thing, fighting with each other, stealing each other's livestock, burning each other's villages, and capturing the females. Typically, after a city-state was wiped out, they'd kill or castrate or blind the men, and they would take captives of girls and women, and they would be enslaved and eventually perhaps bought and sold along with the livestock. So there's a lot of bad stuff in our traditions. And I'm proud of the book because I trace it to the domestication of animals. It was the very first form of animal exploitation. It was when we brought those sheep and goats down from the mountain slopes and put them in pens and took control over their sex lives and everything else.
Yeah, it all goes back to that, where it all started to fall apart. And I like how you're tying in all of this. And so when you talk about how religious dogma has really impacted the treatment of animals because it's so pervasive and accepted and normalized in our thinking, then if that's not true, if what some of these religions say about animals isn't true, what do you believe through your studying is more true about animals? Is it we're meant to be in harmony, as you say, live in harmony, live side by side? And also, what do you tell people who believe animals don't have souls?
I came up with a word, and it's a familiar word, kinship. Kinship. If any of you study biology or Darwin's theory, you must know, as a matter of scientific biological fact, we are kin to other species, especially mammals. We are mammals. We descended or evolved from apes. Our common ancestor was like a chimpanzee, bonobo, ape-like creature, and we branched off. They call it divergence. We diverged from the other ape geni, about 5 million years ago, and we became hominins. And if you've read Harari's book, Sapiens, you'll know that throughout most of the time, since we branched off from the other apes and became hominins, there were 4 or 5 or 6 different species of hominins right up until 200,000 years ago, when there was a mutation somewhere in Africa, probably in Ethiopia, they think, where the modern human species, the sapiens, evolved, and that's our direct ancestor. But all of this time that we were evolving, whether sapiens or the predecessor species of hominins, humans, we lived in the presence of animals. And you have to think about it. If you can try to wrap your head around what those early humans thought and felt about the world around them, it was a still and motionless place for the most part, except for the animals that they lived among. Animals made sounds. Animals did things that humans could recognize as familiar. Animals could be seen, could be observed grazing, pooping, peeing, having sex, giving birth. When they hunted them, they could see they had blood, they had organs like ours. So there was a familiarity with animals in those days, even though much of it was surrounded with superstitions, but people were familiar with the species that lived around them, the other animal species, and they felt a sense of kinship with other peoples, other animals. And if you know much about the anthropology of what we call tribal people, that is indigenous societies that are non-agricultural, they have totems, they have totem animals, animals that we like to think that they worship them. They don't really worship these animals, but they consider them powerful. They consider them spiritual members related to them. In fact, in some of the creation stories of these people and what remains of those societies, most of them are gone now, but their stories were recorded up into the 1920s and 30s. With many of those peoples, they felt that they were descended from the totem animal. And in some places, like in North America, it was the coyote or the caribou, and in other continents, it would have been the wolf or the tiger or some other prominent, powerful animal that people would relate to almost as an ancestor, as someone they were kin to. So there was that sense of continuity of life in the world. Human life wasn't separate and distinct from and superior to the other animals. They were related, and I call it kinship. And I preach that that's the kind of way of seeing other life, especially other animals, that we need to restore, to resurrect, because it was destroyed by the monotheistic religions. And by the way, we should not blame the Hebrews for all of this. I keep saying they were just one of many peoples that came up with this idea of human supremacy and mastery over nature. And we didn't just get it from the religious leaders, from the Judeo-Christian writers. The Greeks and the Romans and their predecessors all felt the same way. If you're familiar with Aristotle, Aristotle was a very big, advocate of human supremacy. He considered that the world was ours to use. It was for the purpose of human benefit and human enjoyment. So we get it from the religious leaders and the secular cultures that preceded us, primarily the Greeks and the Romans and the other civilized societies of the Middle East and the Eastern Mediterranean.
Yeah, thank you so much for laying it out that way in terms of how things have devolved, I will say. And just to reiterate what you were saying, there's so many ways in which humans have broken our connection to animals and literally forgotten that we are animals, as well. And I feel we've forsaken them and betrayed them in so many ways. We owe them so much. So, talk a little bit about how more ways that we can restore that broken kinship. Do you see anything happening among all the chaos and the exploitation? Do you see any reason?
Yeah, it's hard.
Are coming back together?
I like to emphasize the importance of animals to the human mind and culture. This is kind of a difficult idea to wrap your head around. And the reason it's hard is because of the baggage that we have, what I call misandry, which is a bad attitude about animals. It's similar to misogyny. In order to maintain male supremacy, we have to demote females. We have to have some ideology that tells us, that says males are better than females, females are closer to animals. So there's a similar ideology that we carry because of our traditions, because of the Greeks and the Romans and all of the Western cultures and the Bible, that animals are inferior to us. And you'll see it if you read Genesis again. God specifically puts animals there for us to use and to kill and to eat. So that is part of the ideology that I call misandry, from a couple of Greek words. It means hatred and contempt for animals. And it's kind of hard to wrap your head around what I'm getting at when I say that animals are powerful and important, because misandry tried to destroy that idea. Again, going back to the Bible, remember that Moses and the other Hebrew leaders had a hell of a time trying to convince their followers to quit worshiping idols. Remember when Moses came down from the mountain with the tablets, and he found the tribes are down there worshiping the golden calf. What they were doing is they were clinging to their old animal-based religion, where they had totem animals, where they were kind of celebrating the kinship and the leadership of the animals from the Paleolithic times. And Moses, being a monotheist, his idea was to stop this. We have to stop this idol worship, which is to stop those older Paleolithic views of animals as kinfolks. We have to break that off. So what we try to do, what I'm trying to do, is to explain that, yes, we have inherited an ideology about animals that's toxic. It's poisonous. It's enabling us to basically exploit not only animals, but everything in the world. And look what we're doing. Look at the planet, at the shape we're in. So we have to tackle this ideology of human supremacy, of human entitlement, of human dominion, all of which has been preached to us. If we ever went to church, and I did, I never missed a day at church until once in Sunday school, when I asked the preacher if I would see my dog in heaven. I think I was about 17 years old. And the preacher very solemnly said, "No, I'm sorry, that's not possible. Animals don't have souls." And at the time, it really broke me up. I thought, no, I'm not going to go there. I don't want to be there. If they don't have souls, I don't want to join. I'm not going. So I quit. I quit the church at that point. Anyway, I'm rambling, but there is an ideology of human supremacy. We have to understand what it is, what it tries to tell us, where it came from, how it formed, because you can't destroy an ideology unless you can understand the whole part of it and all of its parts and its beginnings. Like, you have to see how it formed so that you can take it apart.
Yeah, I mean, it really makes me think, because I'm like a therapist by trade, about the collective psychology of human beings. That, do we really, is our self-esteem, like our sense of self, that small and low that we feel the need to, to project onto these most innocent of beings? And I know that didn't happen not overnight, and it's such an ingrained psychology to believe that we are elite, that we are better, and that animals are less than. So, how do we begin to combat that? Is it more a systemic change that you would think, or is it more consumer change, individual change, or all of the above?
Well, throughout almost all of my adult years, my education is in biology. And there's so much truth in biology, even though it kind of scares us to think about it, because when we think of biology, animal rights activists, we think of laboratory experiments of torturing animals. But I'm talking about the part of biology, the Darwinian part of biology, where we understand how we evolved as mammals, as related to the other ape species. I really think this scares off a lot of people. And the reason it does is because their minds are full of misandry. They don't want to see themselves as related to other apes. They don't want to see themselves as kin to other animals, to other species. And I think that's very important to stop thinking that way and to recover and restore, and in fact, to rejuvenate our sense of kinship with other animals. Like when I go to bed at night and I lie there and cuddle my kitty cat and she purrs, and I feel there's an emotional comforting going on between us. It's, all of you who have pets see this, whether you have dogs or cats or whatever. So it's very important to sense that, to feel that, and to really amplify it as much as we can, to see and feel, especially to feel a sense of kinship with the other living beings that we live with on the planet. And in order to be able to do that, to feel that way, it's kind of important that we not kill them, that we not torture them, that we not hurt them, because that would break up the whole feeling that we have for these creatures. So that's what I try to emphasize: kinship, kinship, kinship. Recognize it, study it, see it, look at it.
Yeah. Yeah, it really seems from that perspective that we're in a crisis of lack of empathy. and disconnect from our true compassion. I don't know that there's science behind this part of it, but the spirituality of, what are your thoughts about how it is for animals? Like, what is their experience of the world the way that it is? How aware are they on a higher conscious level?
Yeah.
Obviously,
Yeah.
they're sentient and they feel pain and emotion, but on an even higher level, do you believe that they are aware of this?
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you spend any time at all with animals, even the ones that are exploited, you know in your heart, and logically and intellectually, they feel, they experience fear, they experience joy. I'm uplifted almost daily because I get these clips on the news and on Twitter and by email of people showing the playfulness of other animals. And I'm always moved by some that show different species playing together. One was moving a few weeks ago. It showed a dog rescued a cat that had been injured, probably been hit by a car. And the cat was lying in the street, and the dog picked up this cat and moved it out of the street. And I see other examples of videos that people have taken showing animals actually caring for each other, showing affection for each other, expressing emotions that we think are unique to us. And the more we see that, the feelings in other animals, and sometimes those feelings are hard to read because we don't necessarily read it in a horse or a cow. They express themselves in different ways. We can see it in our dogs and cats because we're so much more familiar with them on a daily basis. But if you were to spend time around these other animals, the ones that we exploit, pigs, for example, are one of the most social, the most sensitive, the most intelligent of all the domestic species of the farm animals. And few of us get a chance to spend our day or any quality time with pigs. But if you did, you would see how they show fear, how they show warmth, compassion, joy, playfulness. It's all there. We just have to see it and identify with it, identify with that mammal behavior of which we're a part.
Yeah. I always say jokingly, but not jokingly, that animals are our teachers.
Yeah.
Call them like bodhisattvas, like they are the sages. They have the wisdom, and are we ignoring that? Are we just so pinched off from that? Is it just so running through that filter of that elitist, egoic based view?
Yeah, that's the one, the ideology that we have to break through. I call misotry, which is like misogyny. If we're going to have equality between the sexes, male and female, men have to abandon and understand that their views of women are colored by misogyny. There's a traditional, cultural hatred and contempt for the female. Same with animals. We have to understand that we have this attitude, that we have carried this ideology because it was planted in us as children. We grew up with it. We grew up with daddy being the head of the household. I grew up on a farm, and I grew up with adults that told me animals don't feel pain. Animals were put here for us to use. It's okay for us to hurt them and kill them and eat them. So I was brought up on misotry and dominion, and I've learned to undo it by studying it, seeing where it came from, seeing the roots of it. I've learned to try to purge myself of that ideology, to get rid of it, get it out of my mind.
Yeah.
And as activists, what we have to do is not only get it out of our minds, get it out of our culture, so that more kids are not brought up with this brainwashing, with these ideologies that are hurtful to animals and to the planet.
Yeah, I was going to say this hatred and contempt for animals is so, it's like water to fish. We're in it, and it's just everywhere, and so people can't see past it or beyond it because there's
exactly
nose to nose with it every day. And so I'm glad you're starting to sort of connect the dots to us as activists, those of us who are activists. Would you recommend that we point that out? I mean, I know it depends when we have conversations and we're approaching groups and individuals to open up their minds as a way. Should we point out Or is it too over their heads sometimes to sort of point
That's,
at their
yeah, I know.
mindset that's just so normalized?
It's kind of tough to say this in simple language, is concisely. It's a lot. It's a bit much. Basically, what you're doing is trying to explain to them what's wrong with Western culture that they've been brought up on. And they'll look at you like you're some kind of a nutcase because that's all they know. They've been brought up on this belief, and to try to tell them that it was a bad thing for the world, it takes a while. You have to read some books. I actually had to read a lot of anthropology for the stuff that I put in my book, in Unnatural Order, and I found many sources that said that the domestication of animals led to patriarchy, female slavery, a culture of warfare among the city-states that were fighting with each other for land. It led to male cults of warriors and soldiers that were exalted above other members of the society because it was so important to be strong, to be a good fighter. And this is, again, another strain of our culture that's been so destructive. Why do we have to have war all the time? Why is it that every nation in the world has to have a standing army with death-dealing weaponry? What has happened? 5,000 years of civilization and every nation is armed to the teeth to kill everybody else. I mean, this is crazy. What kind of a species does that? What is wrong with us?
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. That's a lot. Of course, it's so deep, and it has so many layers that it's impossible to just start to point that out to someone who hasn't had any exposure,
That's been,
Why?
that's been the problem in promoting the book, because someone says, well, what's it about? Well, it's about patriarchy, it's about militarism, it's about constant warfare, it's about slavery, it's about so many things that are so horrible. So my joke, I say, well, it's about 250 pages.
What's it about? It's about 200.
Trying to be cute.
Well, and we see it one-on-one, us as activists, when we go out to have outreach conversations, that maybe men especially, but men and women really, get so triggered when you start to talk about this, and that cognitive dissonance comes about, and they get defensive and they feel like they're being judged, and all of it
Yes,
you're questioning and challenging, respectfully, hopefully, challenging this, paradigm that they've invested themselves in for their whole lives, basically.
Well, especially those who are religious, because some of the anthropology, many things I read said that the idea of monotheism, the Judeo-Christian Islamic God, man in the sky, was invented by shepherd people. I found several sources for that idea. One especially was a book on sociology, where they looked at all different kinds of hunter-gatherer, early agricultural civilizations and societies, and they measured their belief systems. And very common to herding people, they call them pastoralists, people who herd sheep, goats, and cattle, camels, horses. They are kind of a male supremacist groups, societies. They deal in slavery and warfare. So there's some things they have in common that really became part of our culture. So I just think it's important to understand that. I would hope that if people understand this evolution of this idea of dominion, human supremacy, male supremacy, supremacy over the world, the idea that the world was given to us to use, the utilitarian ideology, the better we understand it, maybe if more of the younger activists understand this, we'll be able to think of strategies. How do we use this knowledge as part of our activism? How do we explain to people that the worldview that they have based on animal exploitation is not good for us? It's not good for human beings. It's not good for our food supply. It's not good for the planet. I think that's what we have to do. Understand how it happened and then figure out simple ways to explain it to people.
Yeah, I agree. And, I do want to open up for questions, from folks who are with us, but I'm glad we're connecting the dots between all the theory here and the practicality of
Yes,
what can
yes.
we do like tomorrow. Is there one thing before we go to the questions, is there just one thing you can say to activists who are on the verge of burnout, who are inspired by this even, or who want to find their place in this movement? What would you, suggest?
Yeah. Well, maybe if you just take one piece of it, instead of trying to explain the whole ball of wax, I think women understand it better because women, more and more these days, the women I know understand patriarchy. They understand that their condition of inequality, of powerlessness, is because of the tradition of patriarchy in Western culture. And if we just take that part of it, explain to women, look, you're victims or survivors of a patriarchal culture. This is the system. This is systemic segregation and oppression and discrimination that's been inherited by everybody. So if we just take one piece, let's just take women's inequality, patriarchy. I think you can get that across to activists. And I think the younger activists perhaps instinctively understand, yes, women's status has been carved out in history by this ideology that we call patriarchy. And it's bogus, and we have to get rid of it. We have to abolish it because the evidence is all to the contrary. Women can do all the things that men can do and always have. It's just that we have not permitted that. Women couldn't even vote until, what, 100 years ago in this country? That's pretty recent. So anyway.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Thank you for everything that you've shared already so far. I just want to remind everybody of Jim's book. If you haven't already have it.
I'm proud to note that that's my photograph on the cover. That's me. I identify as an ape.
That's your totem.
I'm proud to be I'm proud to be a descendant of chimps and bonobos.
We should all be proud of that. Indeed. Beautiful. So questions, I'm opening it up now to anyone who has a question. If you do have a question, go ahead, and I prefer if you could hit the hand raise icon, which is somewhere you can find that on your screen under reactions, or you can simply raise your hand and I'll try to see you, or you can put something into the chat.
It's Kim Stallwood.
Yeah, she's saying she's been friends with you, Jim.
Kim and I became acquainted at a famous conference at Cambridge in England in 1977 or 78. And he and I corresponded for years. And that correspondence led us to do magazines. He did one in the UK, and I did Animals Agenda in the United States, Animal Rights Movement magazines. So Kim and I, that's one of our first pieces of activism from what, Kim, 1978?
Yeah, it's such an honor to be joined today by, the spectrum of folks who have started this movement, and we're in the middle, and we were talking about, the future of this movement. But Laura has a question. You want to?
Hi, Laura.
And ask. You have to unmute yourself. There you go. There you go.
Hi. Having trouble with my computer freezing for a second there. But first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for an Unnatural Order. It has been enormously inspirational and influential for me in developing my ideas about how the oppression of non-human animals relates to all forms of human oppression and ecocide, and all the interconnections between those things. And so I wanted to bring up a couple of things. I actually have two questions.
Sure.
The first is, I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about how we can solve this problem on a communal level as opposed to solely on the individual level, although I do believe that it has to be addressed on the individual level. But at the end of an Unnatural Order, you do go into some ideas about how to solve this problem on the societal level, but I'm wondering if you've had any further thoughts since you first wrote that text.
Yeah. Well, what just springs into mind is the thing that I did in the 70s called rap groups. The feminist movement at that time, the second wave feminists, started consciousness raising groups. And women got together and talked about patriarchy and women's inequality and women's issues. And because I was close to some of the women at that place and time in Connecticut, I started a men's rap group where we got the men together one night a week and we talked about our attitudes. And it was very educational. We talked about our own prejudices. In that place and time, it was mainly about our ideas of male supremacy, how we viewed women, how some of us were using women, myself included, of course, because I wasn't conscious yet. So maybe if groups of activists would get together and talk about among themselves about some of these deeper, more abstract ideas about the importance of animals and the way we see the world, misandry, how we have loads of bigoted, prejudiced ideas about animals. Like I was told, animals don't feel pain, animals don't have emotions. That's all part of it. So that might help some people become more aware of the ideology that we're trying to stop, which is animal exploitation. That's all I can think of off the top of my head, but that might get it started among like-minded activists that can meet and talk to each other. And of course, now we could do it online. We could do it on Zoom or something.
Yeah, I
Does that
totally
help?
agree. And actually that's really interesting because that's making me think also that there is still so much gender stuff to work through.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Really big wave of that coming up as an issue. It always was an issue, but now it's like very, people are really, aware that there's still a lot of work to do in that area. And there's been like a lot of backlash to, that awareness being raised.
Oh
so
my
I'm
God,
like,
yes.
yeah. So I'm like, oh, that's really interesting to think about kind of bringing back the idea of a rap group, and you could have that on the intergender level as well as on the intra-gender level. So you could have like, kind of, I'm thinking almost like a safe space in a way, but in a safe space to have those sorts of difficult conversations. And then, to bring in the issue of non-human animal oppression and animality and all of that, that would make that even more powerful, I would say, very much more.
Well, the more you study patriarchy and how it formed, it all had to do with the breeding of livestock. Sex and reproduction was a thing to be controlled to increase the wealth of the group. So they had very strict and black and white ideas about sex and gender. So we had this total bipolar, male, female, and nothing else. And gay people were discriminated against. I got a whole section in the book on homophobia, where the patriarchy did not like non-reproductive people. It didn't like any kind of form of sexual pleasure that didn't produce fertilization. Masturbation was evil, an abomination. So patriarchy shaped our sexuality into these rigid channels for breeding purposes. So the more we identify with animals, the more we identify with the biology of ourselves, we might understand more about human sexuality, and that it is like a blend of things. And patriarchy has restricted it and made it very, very bipolar.
Hmm.
I think that would help.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's so I do have a second question, but if other people want to ask questions, maybe, if there's time, we can come back around.
Yeah, let's definitely do that. Hold your question and hopefully we will have enough time.
Thanks, Laura.
to circle back to, but I know Kim.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura, very much. Kim, you had your hand up. Do you still want to unmute and ask your question for Jim?
Yes. Well, hello to everyone from England.
I know that voice. Yes, hi, buddy.
Yes. Hey, Jim. How you doing? It's great to see you and be in touch and with you. It's been a long time. I put my question into chat, but I'm happy to read it out, and I'm happy to elaborate on it further. But why does Jim think the animal rights movement hasn't engaged more with the ideas of feminism, patriarchy, misothery, and misogyny than it has?
Yeah, good question. That's a good one. That's something we all should be discussing, shouldn't we? There's no quick and easy answer. I think it's because maybe in our activism, often we're unaware of the prejudices that we carry. We're unaware of the ideologies that we've inherited. I know this is true of a lot of the men in the movement. Even though they may be sensitive to animals, I know some of the men I've known in the movement are not the least bit aware of their sense of male entitlement. And I'm myself included. I'm still working on that as I can at my advanced stage. But yeah, it's something to be addressed because I had to address my own racism, which I was brought up on. I was brought up in segregated rural Missouri. And as I went out in the world and I encountered people of color, I was kind of shocked at myself that I had such horrible ideas because I was never exposed to other people. And so it's a very important part of progressive consciousness to be aware of all of the poisonous ideologies that were foisted on us before we knew better. And I think as animal activists, we really should try to identify those and work on them.
Can I have a quick response? Jim, thank you very much for the answer. It's a real challenge, I think, to get the animal movement to think beyond the animal movement itself. And I was thinking the one organization that I could give as a good example of where it is trying to break the links out from just being focused upon animals, but situate the animal issue in a broader social justice context is the Food Empowerment Project.
Okay.
They're very, very much on the track of wanting to situate animal issues within a broader social justice framework.
Excellent.
Well,
Well,
thanks for your answer, Jim.
well, the other thing is spread the word among activists. All of us have a circle of activist colleagues, and we just talk among ourselves and say, look, we got to tackle this and that. We got to tackle racism, misogyny. It's part of our activism. It's part of the big picture. So I think we do need to urge that on fellow activists. And if you've spent any time in the animal rights movement and gone to any conferences or rallies or whatever, it's always about 75 to 80% female. This is really a woman's movement. I know it was a woman in the movement that got me started and got me active in the early 70s. So that's the big part of animal rights is the female power in this movement.
Thank you, Kim. Great question. Great to hear Jim's perspective on this. And just to reiterate, yeah, so it's a women's movement. And so any other questions then? Any
One
other-
of the notes that just appeared on the screen is that bringing up other issues that are other progressive issues is a distraction from the animal thing, that we have to give the animals priority. I agree with that, but you know, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can be animal activists and also conscious of our other prejudices. We don't want to go out there and be racist, sexist bigots pushing animal liberation. It's like, anyway, that's enough.
Indeed. We are all earthlings. So any other questions? Did I miss any questions? Laura, I know you have a second question, so let me just see if anybody else has, or we can swing back to you. Any other questions? Did I miss any in the chat? If I did, I apologize. Please retype it, or Trey can let me know.
I know when I was doing the magazine Animals Agenda, the news magazine, the Animal Rights Network throughout the 80s, we tried to introduce some other perspectives, especially the feminist perspectives, and we got some hate mail at the time. And I don't want to hear about, gay rights. I'm an animal activist. Don't give me that stuff. So there's some of that still in our movement. So let's address it.
Conversations like this right now.
Thank you.
All right, we'll still wait. We can still have some other questions, but Laura, if you want to ask your second question, go ahead
Sure.
and do that.
Yeah. So my second question has to do with this issue of humans, distancing themselves from identifying as animals, or not, or embracing that identity, accepting that identity. And I definitely, think that there's certainly a very, very true that there's a big problem with humans seeing themselves as different and special and unique from all the others, and in fact entitled to dominate all the others on that basis, all the other species. But I also want to talk about the flip side to that, which is when humans do embrace the idea of their animality, which is something that I feel like hasn't really been addressed in the animal rights movement in a way that I feel like it could be. So, basically what I see with that is that sometimes you will get just like, of course you get this disgusting manifestation of still trying to keep this separation, but saying, oh, only those humans over there are more like animals, right? Which is where you get obviously, the racism and the,
Sure.
right, you get all of that. But you also have another aspect of that, and this is where Darwinism really does come into it, where there's this sort of social Darwinist framing of we are all animals, and because we are all animals, then it's like this, law of the jungle and dog eat dog, and we're the, we have to, and it becomes very eugenicist, really, and fascistic. So I think that there is another side to this where, you say, well, we need to embrace our animality. That can go in these very, very oppressive directions. So
Well, that's
I wanted to know if you had any thoughts about that and about how the animal rights movement might respond to that side of animality.
Can you let me respond to what you just said? There are people who would turn that we are animals thing into a dark, negative, violent direction. That's what I call misogyny, the hatred of animality, the way of seeing animals as vicious, bloodthirsty. Look at the way we characterize a serial rapist murderer in the press. Whenever there's a heinous, violent crime, that person, usually a man, is referred to as an animal in the press. That's pure misogyny. That's the kind of thing that human beings do, not necessarily animals. Animals don't do mass murder and serial rapes. So when you see that person doing that, shout out the word misogyny, spell it out for them. If they don't understand what it is, tell them it's like misogyny. It's a hateful, contemptuous attitude toward another being, a relative of yours, a kin person, a kinfolk, and you're just spewing hate and bigotry and prejudice.
I do agree with that, but I'm thinking about situations where it's actually the dominant class or system themselves embracing that animality
Yeah.
of their perception of what
Sure.
animality is. You know, because I feel like there's really a lot of that side of things where it's not that they're looking at somebody else and saying, oh, that person's just an animal. It's that they're saying, we are all animals and we include ourselves in that. And then interpreting animality as a whole society of animals where, you know, it's the survival of the fittest.
Yeah.
Right. So, you know, and I mean, you see this in like social Darwinism, in the eugenics movement, in Nazism, even, where there is this sort of like embracing of the idea that, oh, yes, we are all animals, but then this distorted perception of what and who animals, quote unquote, are.
All right, Laura, let's let Jim respond and then we'll go on to the next question. But
Yeah.
thank you so much. It's such a deep discussion. Jim, anything
Well,
else?
I understand what you're bringing up here, and it's something that we have to deal with as activists. There are people among us that we're outnumbered by people who hate animals, who believe that they're to be used. They were put here for our use. Yeah, what you're saying is that's what we're up against. And we're going to be up against it for a long time as we work toward animal liberation. So there's no quick and easy answer, except better activism, better communication, better tactics, better explanations of how animals are important to us emotionally and other ways, and not just as food. So it's a piece at a time. It'll take time. We just have to dig in, keep at it, inspire others, spread the word, stay active.
Great. So, Jim, I know that a lot of people
Thank you.
here really admire Peter Singer. Could you tell us, you know, I'd love to know, what was it like to write? What was it like to write with him?
That was interesting. I was first active with a group in New York City called Friends of Animals. I think all of you have heard of Friends of Animals, now under the leadership of Priscilla Farrell. But in the 70s, the founder was Alice Harrington, who was probably the most intelligent person I've ever known, and a real piece of work, as we say. She chain smoked Pall Mall cigarettes. She drank straight gin. She had a foul mouth. She was just fun to be around with all of her bad habits. But she encouraged me to write about factory farming before I even heard of Peter Singer. Peter Singer was working on his book independently of me working on factory farming for Alice Harrington. And then Peter Singer's essay comes out in the New Yorker Review of Books. And Alice sees that and she says, we got to meet this guy. So we have lunch together. Peter and I get acquainted. We talk about factory farming. I helped him find the farms to take pictures for animal liberation, the veal farm and the battery cage facility. So, and then when his book came out in 1975, we realized that we had discovered a monster. Factory farming was really unknown to the animal movement. I don't know, very few of you are old enough to remember what animal welfare was like back in those days before there was an animal rights movement. No major organization in the 70s even said anything about farm animals. It was off limits. I remember a prominent activist at the time, when I was telling him that I was writing about factory farming, he says, oh, you might as well forget about that. That's like digging out a mountain, and you know, that'll never sell. Stick to cruelty to animals in laboratories and pets. So none of the big groups, Humane Society of the United States, ASB, none of them had anything on factory farming or farm animals. It was off limits. But Peter and I, after Animal Lib came out, we got to corresponding back and forth. There was no email yet. We were writing letters back and forth. He was back in Australia, where he's from. And we just started discussing, let's do a whole book on factory farming. And Peter's first idea was, we have to have lots of photographs. You cannot describe these places. And if you were able to describe what a factory farm looks like, nobody would believe it. Pictures are worth 1,000 words. So that was a tactic. We're going to write a book and it's going to be mostly photographs. So that's what launched the book that became Animal Factories. It came out in 1980. And it got quite a bit of publicity, I have to say. Somehow I got on NBC's morning talk show Today. Jane Pauley was the anchor woman in those days. And she was out sick that day, so I had another interviewer, but I was able to get on NBC's morning talk show Today and show color slide photographs, images of the inside of factory farms. And if you've seen those, you know how shocking they are. The people that have never seen this, they're shocked by it, can't believe it. And that was a pretty big exposure. And the book did get a lot of reviews in major papers. I got an op-ed in the New York Times. We got a good review in the Washington Post, Atlanta Journal-Constitution. We got a lot of good reviews in major media outlets. And the television exposure was important because this is before most of the viewers' time. There was no cable internet in those days. There were 3 networks, ABC, CBS, and NBC. And the huge audience that watched television was divided among those 3. And I think NBC's Today Show had the biggest audience. I could look into it, but it was tens of millions of viewers saw pictures of factory farms for the first time. And it must have been really shocking. And that was in 1980. And then the book was revised and updated and came out again in 1990 and got even more exposure. I was on CNN, I was on NPR. I did a lot of radio talk shows. So it really did get a lot of exposure in the 80s and then in the early 90s.
Yeah, so I mean, you've seen so much and been working in the animal rights movement for 50 years.
Yeah.
Have any predictions for the future? We're not going to hold you to it. And
Well,
what do you think
I'm encouraged that there's so much more acceptance and activity under the animal rights umbrella. We have so many more activists now. And the vegan diets and vegan choices are so popular now. It's not a majority of people making those choices, but there's so much more of a buzz about it now. Now we can watch any major medium and see that famous people are vegan, like New York City's mayor, Eric Adams, is a vegan, and he speaks out about it. And any activist could, Ricky Gervais, the comedian, so many prominent people with a public image, with public visibility, are announcing the vegan lifestyle and sensitivity to animals. It's a thing now. It's a big thing, and it's growing, and it's bigger and bigger. Whereas in the 70s, like I said, no animal group, and they were called animal rights groups, had anything. Farm animals weren't even on their agenda, and they didn't want to discuss it, didn't want to talk about it. When you went to an animal event in those days, they served meat and eggs and cheese and everything, animal products. I know there was a big stink when Kim Stallwood and I met at that famous conference in Cambridge in 1977 or 78. They served animals for the dinners until we made a big stink about it. And I think the last day of the conference, they changed that. But yeah, there's a lot of progress. It may not seem like it to some of you, but I've seen a world-changing, world-shaking change since I started getting active in the 1970s.
So gonna wrap up, but not just yet. But I know, we're seeing, what are your thoughts on we're seeing sometimes that animal rights activists do get prosecuted, occasionally go to jail as terrorists? Where do you see that maybe improving at any point? And do you have your thumb on the pulse of any of that?
Direct action, you're talking about
Yeah,
direct.
certainly there was the acquittal recently of Wayne
Yeah.
direct action after,
Yeah.
pigs. What are your thoughts on that? And
I think it's important. I think it's important, and I think it should go on, and we should do more of it. But I think the activists in Utah, direct action everywhere, was very smart to be concerned about the popular perception of some of these events. I don't think out and out vandalism, just going in and smashing things, is going to look that good. And you got to sort of weigh trying to capture the images of the animals in these terrible conditions, or even rescue some of them, and not at the same time appear to be like criminals as the news comes out about the event. I think you have to really be, it's a tightrope, it's a fine line. So you got to do it very responsibly and always have an eye toward how it's going to be seen by the public, how it's going to be treated in the media. Now, the way Direct Action Everywhere did this rescue of the pigs at the factory farm in Utah, it came off really well and they were acquitted. The jury let them go. They thought, yeah, this is a conscientious rescue of some suffering baby pigs. And the public can relate to that. But if the action were done a little bit differently, like some other group had done it, the news coverage could have had another slant, and they would not have looked so good. So I think do the direct actions, the more we're in there and take pictures and show the public what it looks like, how the animals are treated. Yes, we have to do that. But I do think that we have to be kind of careful. We have to kind of have a PR, public relations awareness about how this might be perceived, because you want to look good. You want the public sympathies. You want to rescue animals, but you also want to appeal to the public and what you're doing.
Yeah, it reminds me that the invention of the mobile phone that includes a camera,
yes,
is a game changer in so many ways, positive and negative, but positive in terms of our movement, being able to get the footage that we're now able to get and be able to just put it right up on the internet, and then billions of people, have access to it.
Yeah, yes, and I just thought of something. And the other kind of footage, imagery that we want to show is the heartwarming scenes of animals cuddling each other and rescuing each other, and those things that I see every day on Twitter and Facebook and all of the social media and in the news even now, where we see that animals actually show their feelings for each other. I just read one this morning, a dog that had been lost 8 years ago, was returned to its owner, and there was instant recognition. I mean, that you've got to show stuff like that.
Yeah, that will definitely, the positive activism, as we call it.
That kind of stuff, exactly.
Yeah, and that will help people move beyond their speciesism, that's in their mind. So we're gonna move toward wrapping up, Jim. But do you have any final words or a main message, or what you would really love to impactfully leave people with today?
Well, I got to tell you, just on a personal level, it's good for me spiritually and politically to have this correspondence, this conversation, this connection with activists, because, I'm sort of old and out of the picture. I'm 82 years old now. I'm not as active as I was 40 or 50 years ago. I don't go to all the meetings and the conferences and the get-togethers. I don't get to have that kind of face-to-face communication with my colleagues. So this has been very good for me. I live in a one blinker light town in rural Missouri. Needless to say, there are not a lot of vegans and animal rights activists here. So I enjoy having this communication with you. It's been very good.
I think it's been equally wonderful for us. And I hope that people will share this recording, especially with younger folks, so we can really spread, as Jim was saying, it's up to us, each of us, to go out today, tomorrow, to spread this and to talk about it and to open up those conversations. So
I should give my Twitter handle to people so they can follow me.
oh, that would be great. Go ahead
Yeah,
and Trey, as he says it, you'll put it in the chat, or Jim, if you could put it in the chat.
I don't know how to do that. Do I write it in the chat?
We'll get it in there.
Okay, it's at Jim Mason AUO with the initials of the book. At Jim Mason AUO, and the Jim is capital J and the Mason is capital M and the AUO is capital. So that'll get you on. Follow me.
Right. Are you only on Twitter? Or are you on any other platforms, or
Just Twitter at the moment. It's hard to handle anything else.
All right, everybody give a little round of applause for Jim, and thank you so much. But don't leave us yet, because I want to do a little wrap up and announcements in regard to AAM, who is hosting Jim today in this workshop. Our next workshop that I wish to announce is on February 21st, next week. We have a workshop entitled, okay, no, I didn't write, it's well, it's also about effective activism, and I forgot to write down the title. And on February 28th, we have Dharma Voices for Animals, which includes a guided Buddhist meditation designed for activists. And again, please check out all our previous workshops on our YouTube channel and subscribe while you're there. You can find our YouTube channel by just searching for Animal Activism Mentorship on YouTube. And I also wanted to invite all of you and announce that we have 3 live events happening in 2023. The AAM Washington, D.C. Week of Action is taking place March 14th through the 20th. Coming up, the Colorado Convergence is taking place in and around Denver. The dates are June 24th through July 1st. And the Ohio Occurrence is being held September 1st through the 3rd, and I believe that's around Cincinnati, Ohio, but someone can correct me. Thank you, Panima. The workshop's name is Research-Based Strategies for Activists Overcoming Futility and Other Psychological Hurdles. I couldn't remember that mouthful. And so to find the information about our live events and our workshops, make sure you follow us on social media, on Facebook, on Instagram. Registration is required. No experience required, but registration is required. So you'll find the events on our Facebook page and on our website if you would like to join us in any of those locations, live in the streets, doing activism together. So that wraps up another AAM workshop. Thank you, Jim, again, so much for your time and wisdom. Thank you all for being here and the tireless work you're doing for animals. If you're interested in becoming a mentor or mentee or want to get involved, please reach out to any AAM mentor or visit our website, animalactivismmentorship.com. Please consider becoming a patron by finding AAM on Patreon. And if you'd like to be on our email newsletter list, please go ahead and drop your email in the chat. You can to me privately or to the group. If you would rather not share, you can do it to me privately. Also, feel free to drop your Instagram handles if you'd like us to follow you in the chat as well. So that's it. Thank you all so much. Until next time, everybody, stay strong and live vegan, everyone.